What is up, Doom Patrollers? Welcome back to a brand new Doom Patrol review, breakdown, and recap for episode 7, titled Bird Patrol. And what a fantastic episode of Doom Patrol, bringing so many well, let me start at the beginning. This was like a quintessential Doom Patrol episode. Weirdness, wackiness, such sentimental moments with characters, so much exploration into new weird and wacky areas with Larry and his freaking negative, I was about to say negative baby, but what would you call that? It just gave us all the context towards the end, which really drove us forward in this season. A lot more than what I was expecting this episode to do. I thought this episode would be continuing along the Bureau flashbacks with Rita and Malcolm and their sisterhood, but I didn't expect it to go the way it did, especially with, I feel like, the climactic final part to the episode really just stealing the show. So I just need to get into the details, guys. Let me know your thoughts, your theories, everything to do with this episode down in the comments below. And yeah, just like this video if you do go on to enjoy it, and of course subscribe for more Doom Patrol videos like this. So the very beginning of the episode picked up with the Sisterhood working on this cage. So at the beginning, this was like really ambiguous, and I knew that they were cooking something up because we saw Sleepwalk initially like welding the cage, and something was going on with that. And throughout the episode, we saw that she continued working on it, which let out a massive horn sound. And more or less, it was really about releasing or starting, or as they put it later on, it's the prologue to the reckoning, the eternal flagellation. And I've been really wondering what that is all about, and I didn't know if it was going to be a literal like setting the world on fire. I didn't know if they were really going to go that far and that hard, especially learning more and more about these characters and relating with them. There's one thing before I get into a tangent about it. I love how Doom Patrol makes us relate to the seeming antagonists of this season. I knew it might have been a bit of a play back and forth with us connecting with the characters in the past to, yes, present day they're wounded, but they might be doing something fairly bad, which you wouldn't necessarily condone, but you really empathize with their struggle and what led them to this point. And it's even more interesting when you've literally got present day Rita in on the fold as well, just kind of as much as like Lord Mille is remembering everything at the very end. It was a nice twist, obviously revealing Rita in that moment. It definitely sets up something very, very unique, having a current character of the Doom Patrol knowing everything about the Sisterhood, and the other members must just be thinking, Rita, like, what is going on? We also had Larry puking up his negative baby, if you will, or like a little negative maggot or thing. I don't know if it's gonna like blossom into a beautiful little butterfly. I don't know. I was honestly expecting at one point for a literal negative energy thing to kind of pop out of it, and maybe that could still happen. Maybe it is just in a cocooning stage before we get another spirit-like thing coming out of it. But either way, this turned into some hilarious scenes between Larry in the episode that we'll pick up a little bit later on. But of course, on the Cyborg front, we pick up where we left off with him thinking and considering to get some synthetic skin. Now, he initially runs into a doctor who actually, I believe, worked with his mother. And in this moment, there's a few more things that I feel like solidify this as an option for Cyborg, because obviously we've had the conversations about choosing between the cyber tech for Vic and then also the synthetic skin back then when he was talking to his father, which is when this doctor says that she was really surprised with how Silas chose the cyborg tech for him, but didn't come to her, meaning that like she expected him to, but he never did, which obviously, without going round with that argument again to Silas from Vic, it is something that is probably making him think internally, like, yeah, but Dad, why didn't you? Why didn't you do that? So maybe I should do it now. We learned that he can have this operation, but it would mean for his cyber tech to be completely removed. It can also be a very quick procedure, which kind of makes me think this is to put some pressure on him making that decision sooner, because it can just be done overnight. I mean, within this very same episode. And she encourages him to talk to a loved one, which I thought would maybe be going back to Silas and them more or less rehashing this conversation, but I was very glad to see that it was actually him reaching out to Ronnie, and quite literally a little bit of a low-key loved one. And I was wondering when we were going to see her again. She was actually trying to turn it back round to utilizing the cyborg tech and not necessarily rejecting it. But obviously in this moment, Cyborg is still having frenzy, Lloyd Malcolm and what he said to him a couple of episodes back in episode 5, living rent-free in his head, because he was wondering about what's been missing, how can he help people if there's this barrier to them, how can they relate. She then gets gets into how you can somewhat change from the inside. You don't have to like necessarily change the outside and what Cyborg is considering to do, and that's one thing really that Cyborg taught her, that like obviously change can come from within, especially with what she was considering to do, and you don't have to find another way because he already has a way. Like his cyborg tech is great to be utilized as a hero, and that's what we know Cyborg wants to be. This didn't actually get to a proper resolution though. I thought it might, but Victor was still insistent that Cyborg isn't me, I'm not happy like this. With Cyborg, obviously he wants to make change, do better, and that's when Ronnie says that he's more of an effective agent of change as Cyborg than he is as Victor, and I think like he wanted some more reassurance from her than hearing just that, because I think he thinks the answer is to just truly be Victor, but it is true, like he will be more effective as being Cyborg than just having all of his grid and cyber tech removed. So this left Vic in a very interesting place in where I think he's just going to have to learn to accept who and what he is, where that leaves him, and what he can do about utilizing this change that he's kind of seeking without actually having to make a literal physical change. You don't need, I don't think if he removes that it will really give him the answers he needs, and I think this is what they're leaning into a little bit for him to it's a bit of a crisis, an existential one, and that's obviously a huge theme of this season with identity, with what the Sisterhood of Dada are bringing about with that, and as I stand by what I've said, Cyborg, other than the literal Laura D. Mille trying to remember who she is and Rita and stuff in the past, Cyborg's the most present day one having this identity crisis and really trying hard to seek his answers more than I think anyone else. But also at the beginning of the episode, we had Jane going absolutely crazy at Cliff for selling all of her records, and this is leaning more into his, that, there's double or nothing or something, kind of going back into his gambling roots a little bit from when he was talking to Ginger, the webcam girl, and, all of the games he was playing in the last episode, which is when Jane starts gagging also in this moment. I was like, okay, so what the hell is happening? And that's when, as we know, the Sisterhood this episode was sending out their eternal flagellation posters saying tonight. Like throughout this episode, it was constantly being simmered on the back burner that something is coming, and that's why Laura D. Mille throughout this episode in the present day scenes was just constantly getting frustrated with everyone. Like the Doom Patrol in this typical band of misfit dysfunctional family ways and how they flukily save the day and stuff weren't really as concerned as she thinks they should be, which, eventually by the end of the episode, they realized that, oh crap, this does seem to be quite the thing, where I feel like their hand is going to be forced to try and stop these guys now and whatever they're doing. This whole intro was just hilarious. I can't really summarize it any more than it was just like a really chaotic beginning to the episode, like when you take into account everyone's kind of running around like a headless chicken, Larry's puking up like a negative bebe or maggot or whatever you want to call it, and then we had Flit, who then teleported Cliff to Clara's house, and that kind of continued on the uneasy feeling that they're having about Cliff, because obviously, initially his hand wasn't shaking, but as we know, that really hasn't gone anywhere. He offers to look after Rory, and we know that Clara's wife isn't really happy with Cliff, and it's quite nice because we can see that Clara's trying to give her father some moments, even though she knows that this is a bit like difficult with what's going on. Also, when she gave him her card, did anyone else think that he was just gonna go all out and spend stuff? That would have been quite a regression for Cliff, so I'm glad they didn't technically go there, but I think he did a little bit, because we did have that moment with Ginger later on saying that he paid for 15 minutes, so maybe he did use her card and this might bite him back later on in maybe next episode or the episode after that, where she looks at her bank statement and maybe sees that he used it without her permission. I don't know, I just feel like that card thing was too deliberately placed for that to have not been used. And I think it was. Towards the end of those Clara and Cliff scenes with Rory and stuff, she does mention that, did you hear about this big fog thing rolling in? Like, should we be concerned? So it seems that the fog that Shelley Byron is bringing about isn't just like going to Doom Manor. It seems that it might be, I don't know, circling around the whole county that they're in. Or maybe, who knows, if she has the ability to engulf the whole world. But that technically, I guess, is the plan, because they want to assert change through everyone, and that's where it gets a bit ambiguous with exactly what the eternal flagellation is. But we've got a lot more clues now for the very end of this episode, and if you guys have seen the promo, it seems to serve as this very introspective thing And I guess it's kind of like getting rid of like the bad eggs and keeping the good eggs, if you know what I mean, of potentially the human race. But carrying on with Larry and his little freaking baby, we had Madame Rouge coming and asking after him, and she's obviously still very paranoid about the dangerous threat that's coming along, and nobody's really like taking it too seriously. And she then basically suggests to Larry that he should burn the little maggot, and I was just like, no, don't do that, because it's going to turn into something beautiful. But no, she seems to know a bit, I guess, through dealing with so many metas in the past. I think she puts together it was something to do with him coming into contact with some kind of weird spacey nebulary kind of thing. Larry thinks that she was going to suggest to give it a name. I was really hoping for a name in this episode. That's when this all turned into Larry taking the little negative baby into the woods to abandon it, like literally like abandoning your baby, but he couldn't quite bring himself to. Every single time he began to walk away, he came back, offered it a peanut butter jelly sandwich, and gave it a little blanket to keep it warm. His parental instincts are very much so coming in. But to be fair, when the fog came, he did kind of leave it there, so I wonder what has actually happened to the little maggot baby thing. I'm guessing that it will come back, or maybe it was just teleported with the fog, because it did seem that Larry couldn't quite detach himself from, I guess, his offspring. As I said, I would love your theories as to what you think could come out of this little lump on the floor. I'm guessing it is kind of like a butterfly cocoon statey kind of thing, but I just want to know if a negative baby spirit energy, in the same way that his negative spirit looked before, will come out of it. I think it would just be absolutely hilarious if it's like a really small one, like in the shape of like a body and glowing and sparking like it does. But as I said in my last review, I knew we couldn't leave the Bureau flashbacks from 1949 just in the last episode, so we get a few more of them in this episode, picking up with Madame Rouge in the recruitment office, and we have this nice guy coming in hoping for a certain role, and there's something up. There's something different with Laura D. Mille. It seems that some time has passed ever since Rita got there, and she hasn't attended like the little kind of sisterhood meetings, and she's been separating herself quite a bit. Rita comes in the office and she sees her brand this man a weapon. He seems to have this really cool ability of bringing out something from drawings to life, and you know, she instantly asked the question of, can this be done with artillery? And in theory it can, so he is branded as a useful metahuman. And, you know, we learn a little bit more context about this, which is where we understand a little bit more about Laura D. Mille and somewhat of these pressures she's under. Obviously, it doesn't condone her actions, and I think she knows this just as much as we realize it, and how she feels very bad with what she does later. But she seems to want to rank up a little bit, and if it means kind of doing a bit of a bad or dirty deed, she will kind of go along with the Bureau of Oddities ways, and we know what that is, and they definitely don't look at the Sisterhood members and the little family that they made in an approving way. They look at them as freaks, as that like officer guy said to her later on. We had a conversation between Rita and Malcolm, and this continued there. Like, I'm a bit of a sucker for romance and stuff, and these two, like, their chemistry already, the scenes from last episode, and just seeing them continue on. But then obviously, like, they have to stop holding hands when those bureau officers came through. They look at these guys as freaks, so when they're touching hands, they probably just think even more of that kind of line of thought. It's interesting how Malcolm says she's always been a bit sour for the past 15 years, and Rita looks at it in an empathizing kind of perspective with, well, her job of like sorting through potential weapons or whatever would take a toll on you, and it adds a bit of this duality between this character. Like, even out from the Madame Rouge from the source material, you can see that she likes this little band of Sisterhood members, and that's why she's kept them safe up until this episode. But obviously with what her job entails, and not to mention like working for the Bureau of Oddities, and the way and what that job entails isn't exactly something that is all sunshine and rainbows. So it seems to be somewhat changing her, and I think by this point, compared to what we saw in the flashbacks last episode, I think she knew that she couldn't keep this up forever. It was some kind of inevitability that something would happen at some point with the Sisterhood members. And the same thing somewhat applies to the Sisterhood members, because we have Malcolm and Rita go into their little hideout place, and they've come up with this somewhat new project. Almost forgot, by the way, this obviously happened after the in-between scene where we had that officer guy speak to Madame Rouge, and we find out she's actually been working there for 35 years. So it just adds even more context as to how she's quite ingrained in that system, but obviously has a slightly good part to her, but ultimately the system and her job role and the oath that she took, for some reason, and quite sadly and tragically, took priority. And it's also just interesting hearing about a meta-human arms race, like, around the time of the war. Now, this was after the war, obviously, but it's like, in this DC world, it's like you've got these arms races of all kinds that have happened in the real world, but now imagine, like, a meta-human arms race of these countries trying to, like, get all of them. But as I was just getting onto, the Sisterhood members seem quite past it at this point. They were obviously trying to find happiness for a long time, but there's only so much you can endure together and keep bringing and lifting each other's spirits up time and time again when they're looked at the way they are. They're utilized for certain things, which, as we know, even after this, at the end of this episode, they spend nearly a century in lockup, and they're utilized to do horrible things, like Shelley Byron had to go to whole towns and swallow up whole people on that of the orders and commands of the Bureau of Oddities. So, like, they were really effed up for a long time, even after what they've already been through during this time of finding each other. So they don't really care too much about just, you know, escaping and doing these creative little dances and projects of Dada arts and movements and stuff like Rita and Malcolm were doing. I like how they were wearing each other's, like, faces, and this is obviously a nice nod to Malcolm's face in the underworld, actually reflecting Rita's somewhat wrinkled face on himself, if you know what I mean. So this was the catalyst, really, and this is when the question was somewhat the rallying person through saying, why are we, what are we, and everything. And this brings about, I would say, the best lines from Lloyd Malcolm, Frenzy. I just think his moments in Dada Patrol episode 5 were some of the most empowering and special scenes between him and Javan Wade's Cyborg. So once again here, it gets to a point of where he's just explaining the absolute shit state of things. As I've said, they're already past a lot of it now, talking about how they've just kind of sat by, watched their country make bombs that vaporize people, themselves being subjected to horrors, and they've watched that happen. They're basically just complicit. And I love how he even says the line, like, I can't even, like, I can't, like, this is just screwed. So they kind of collectively agree that maybe the eternal flagellation, which they've kind of already cooked up in the background, but they've never quite asserted until now, could be a big middle finger to the Bureau. And as for Laura, they understand that they might be forcing her to choose, but if that's a difficult decision for her to make, then she's already gone. And I agree. Like, who couldn't agree? The Bureau of Oddities are a bunch of dicks, and if Laura de Mille can't see that and rather choose them, which she does, unfortunately, then you can't really blame the Sisterhood for what they do. And that's what I love about these, and I do air quotes, antagonists, because are they really, you know, with what they want to do? It depends how extreme their methods are for change, because that's when it, you know, bleeds into a bit of a scary line with what people do in the real world today. But at least you can see with what the show has done, with the wonderful writing, the nature of these characters, you know, and albeit in present day they might be a little bit more ruthless with their way of enacting it, but you know it's coming from a good place. But as I said, all those episode reviews back, sometimes the most interesting and worst or dangerous villains, if you will, are the ones who think they are genuinely doing the right thing. But meanwhile, with Jane and the Underground, this was a bunch of interesting scenes, which is just cooking. As I talk about the back burner a lot, well, this is almost at the boiling point in the Underground, because we have Jane visit Kay, who's been crying all day because somebody stole her bike, and we later learn that it was just one of the, probably Dr. Harrison, who stole it. But in this moment, she has a little bit of an outburst at Jane. I think this is not only meant to symbolize her growing up and just throwing a bit more of a tantrum, but also just how she's also getting into a bit of a more depressive state again. This also just makes it look like the Underground personalities have a bigger point over Jane, because they obviously were saying she made a mistake putting Kay up to the surface, so this really looks to be in their favor, but really, all of this was orchestrated by them, so it's quite a rotten thing for them to have done, but it is coming from a place, once again, of vulnerability, worried that they're going to become irrelevant, because Jane later on bursts through the Underground completely fuming, saying who stole the bike, and Dr. Harrison said that it was really just a favor because Kay is staying put right where she belongs, and Jane's like, yeah, because she's depressed, not because she wants to. And this is where it gets really problematic, because they acknowledge, the personalities acknowledge, that they rather her be hurt on their terms, like their own terms of hurting her, rather than her getting hurt in the real world. So they rather let themselves hurt their own person they're trying to protect than her going up there, which is just, I find that messed up. But we know it's coming from a place of where they exclaimed, who's protecting us? And there it is. It is their worry about ceasing to exist if Kay heals. But obviously, they're putting the person they're meant to protect most in this position that they should never really do. But it is certainly such a multifaceted kind of story, if you know what I mean, with this underground... Well, just with Jane, Kay, as a character in general, because these people are real people as well, even if they are within Kay. So, you know, survival instinct would come through, and... You know, it is such a complex, layered story, and I love it. I really do, and I just can't wait to see where it goes from here. But more or less, this is where it was cut off, because everything was coming through with the fog around about these parts in the episode. Because then we would jump back to Vic, who seems to be about to go through with his surgery, but that's when the Sisterhood of Dada logo pops up on the screen. That's when the fog kind of like engulfs Jane. Cliff is also engulfed in fog when he's on the webcam to Ginger. Also, just whilst I remember, we didn't get a continuation as of right now as to who Cliff was selling his Robot Man schematics to, but I'm still quite adamant that he sold it to present day Ultimax and Monsieur Mille, the Brain, yeah, I can't wait to see potentially the Brain walking around in somewhat of a Robot Man V2, who knows? It has to go there, surely. And this is when everyone is more or less teleported together. I thought this was such a well-formatted way to kind of like bring up this precipice of a moment towards the end of the episode, but also just launch us into this revelation. This is what I mean about Doom Patrol. So many things and emotions that I'm feeling at the same time. There was hilarious moments like with Jane and Cliff being like, what the fuck is going on? But then you have these, as I said, these revelationary moments for like Laura D. Mille. Everyone's like acting out the very scene that was happening back in the past, because this was glitching back to 1949, in where we saw Laura D. Mille go back to their little hideaway, and she's there with an ulterior motive. You can see it in her face. They're all really excited to tell her that they're finally going to do the plan of the eternal flagellation and fight back, make a change. And this was really gutting, because you see that, and this is obviously, it completely makes sense now, the catalyst for things, the relationship between Laura D. Mille and just the Sisterhood. There's still, as much as I'm saying, as we've learned, there's still a massive chunk missing, but if you've seen the promo for the next episode, it looks like they're going to fill in those gaps with Laura D. Mille's relationship with the Brotherhood of Evil, and that really seems to be going into Madame Rouge territory, so it's going to be even more layered than what I expected with this. Talking about the funny things as well, it almost got meta in a sense, not really, but Jane was like, what the fuck, like, is this a flashback? As all of that was happening, it's just, I love the Doom Patrol writers. But how could I forget? Before she disappeared, I almost can't believe I forgot this. Malcolm, because beforehand he disappeared with his powers, he then tried to reach out to Laura in that final moment, which was really sad, because also we had that guy who was reluctant to join in the position he was put in earlier. He wanted to work in some other sector. He was forced to use the weapon on Malcolm, which of course ended up killing him. And I knew this would happen. Like, it was kind of obvious when we saw him in the underworld. You could put those two pieces of the puzzle together. But then you saw the bird in his cage dead. Rita then took the heart out of it. It's just like, all the feels were happening in this moment. And very cleverly, that person who was wearing the mask, Malcolm's mask, if you will, in present day, was Rita. And hence why I keep going back to, is this the Rita who's come back? Did we just miss the scene? I mean, understandably so. They didn't want to include a scene of her coming back, because then we would have known what was coming. But I'm guessing this is the Rita who's come back from traveling back in time. And that is when they all get teleported. And Rita's very obviously working, at least with the sister. She says that she is ready, because I'm guessing, you know, Laura D. Mille at this point, it's all come back to her. She remembers the betrayal, she remembers what she did in the past, and this is where things get very, 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 very trippy. And it's even hard for me to make a little bit of sense of it, because we have the cage, and there's a freaking egg in the cage. And that's when the egg hatches, and it turns into, I think, a bit of Malcolm's face with wings. And I think what they're trying to get at there is, these birds, I think they pertain to who is watching them and what they're seeing. For example, when the birds came towards Jane, the faces of the birds all had the personalities of the underground. So I'm guessing what they were getting at here, the reason why that was Malcolm, is because it was intended for Laura D. Mille, because obviously through her actions, that was a bit of her guilt, some of her bad shite from the past. she had to atone, you know, so to speak. Rita says that she had to set him free. This turned into a thing of when Rita opened the cage and we had, I think it was Sleepwalk or somebody else say, no, it has to be Laura. I wonder why, like what that means. Like what would have happened if Laura opened the cage? It's not like that would resurrect Malcolm. So I don't know what that would have done, but I'm very interested into what that line meant when Rita opened it and obviously all the bird face things came flapping out. What would have happened if she didn't do that, and if it was Laura who opened the cage? There are so many moving aspects to this that I just want to praise it all in every single corner, but I'm probably going to forget in some way, shape, or form. But like, I loved it. Like, you saw the emotions for the Sisterhood members, obviously angry at this person, but like, it's also a bit more complicated than that because she's just like, you know, all of this is coming back to her, and Laura Mille is just like, no, I'm not evil, like, you know, but then she doubles down, unfortunately, and, you know, she could just open the freaking cage, but no, she says, no, I swore an oath, and I atoned that day by making useful agents of you. So, like, that is, like, it's just like, why? I was kind of expecting her to actually be like, no, you're right, but no. She doubles down. She really does. And Rita is devastated to hear that, so obviously that's why she opens the cage, and as this is called, it's a bit of a prologue to the actual reckoning. So this isn't even it. I thought maybe the birds upon the world would be engulfing everyone, and they're going to be forced to reconcile with whatever crap they've contributed to potentially themselves, their friends, their lives, the world. Maybe that's what the eternal flagellation is, and as I said, it sorts out the good eggs from the bad eggs, but obviously this is still very unclear at this point. I mean, a big clue to all of that is when Cliff is just like, you know, that sounds bad. Is this bad? And I can't remember who answers, but they say only if you are, hence the good eggs from the bad eggs. But I would love your theories as to what all of this could actually mean beyond that. I love how Jane just got shat on, and she was like the last person left, just looking at all of this and taking it in, just like, this is just freaking nuts. So the promo for next episode looks like it's really going to be this internalized somewhat episode where I think in the promo for season 3, you remember when we saw Matt Bowman's face and they were all walking around this very like yellow filtered area. I think it's going to be that deep dive. We're probably going to see, I think from the promo, Brendan Fraser as well. So next episode I think is going to be another home run, but like this episode was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I don't think I expected the acceleration of the back half of the episode, or the last quarter, if you will, to be as crazy as it was. But I was an absolutely huge fan of this episode. I think it is right up there with my favorites being like Vacay Patrol. That was absolutely fantastic. I mean, each Doom Patrol episode is always fantastic, but this one, there was just something about it. So what were your thoughts on the episode, guys? What are your theories? What are your thoughts on my thoughts? As always, I read every single comment, so I can't wait to read what you have to say. Obviously, we have to look forward to Subconscious Patrol next episode, which gives us another clue into what it could all be about. Maybe the Sisterhood's methods of changing the world aren't as, you know, evil potentially as maybe what we first thought. They just want to force people to kind of maybe look in on themselves. But maybe, well, you shouldn't have to worry about it if you aren't bad, and that's maybe where it's got to go. But anyway, guys, like this video if you did enjoy it. I'd really appreciate that, especially if you got to this point in the video. Subscribe for more Doom Patrol videos just like this. As always, I have links in a top pin comment if you want to talk about Doom Patrol further with me and my Discord server. I have a Twitter link, all those kind of links. As always, as I said, top pin comment. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you Doom Patrollers in the next video. Goodbye.